Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Chad, and I'll be your host today. I'm joined by a few of our panelists from our executive committee, including Dino Trawick, the City of Fort Smith Utilities GIS Manager and Chair of the Arkansas GIS Users Forum, as well as Brian Culpepper, Senior Research Analyst with CAST from the University of Arkansas. Also, Daryl Allen, the City of Hope GIS and Technology Coordinator, as well as Jamie Nash with the Arkansas State University. If you have any questions today, feel free to use the live Q&A option located at the bottom of your Zoom control screen. You can click on Q&A and enter that question at any time during today's presentation, and we'll go back and answer all of the questions at the end of today's broadcast. Also, feel free to use the chat and raise your hand option if you'd like to go ahead and join the conversation. So at this time, I'd like to introduce our presenter today, Cody Massery, present Integrating GIS into the Agfc Annual Turkey and Quail Population Survey. Cody, we'll turn things over to you.
Thank you, Chad, for the introduction. All right, so like Chad said, today I'm going to talk to you about a project that we started about 3 years ago, and it was working to integrate GIS into our existing annual turkey and quail population survey. Before I get into kind of the technology side of that, I want to talk a little bit about the history of it. So both the turkey and the quail survey have been conducted since 1982, and traditionally they were only open to professionals, so either at our agency or other conservation agencies, and it was conducted on paper where the biologists would then mail that into our turkey or quail biologists, and they would compile all that information. And historically, it's been open between June 1st to August 31st, and that's still the time of year when we put the greatest emphasis on it. But in 2020, we did make the decision to open the survey up to just leave it open year round. We felt like we were just losing out on data and that we could always filter it down to that time frame anyway. So we might as well as collect what we could. Also in 2019, we decided to open it up to the public as well, just because with the popularity of crowdsourced data, and we could offer a electronic solution to and hopefully increase our overall submissions. Going into this project, when we decided to integrate GIS into the process, kind of our three big goals were that we wanted to centralize that data into an enterprise database, and with the goal that ultimately we could reduce staff labor with repetitive tasks. So taking all of those mailed in paper copies and transposing that into an Excel file or a CSV, whichever it may be. And then once we got it into a spatially enabled database, we could better look at trends over years, but also just answer more specific questions like in terms of its location. And then before I again get into the technology, I want to give an idea of what the annual turkey and quail survey is. So we used to call this survey the brood survey because it is looking more specifically at reproductive indices, but it's an observation-based survey, and it helps us better monitor population trends throughout the state on a yearly basis. And it looks at two species in particular, wild turkeys and northern bobwhite. And in general, we just want to see how successful they are with breeding and raising young that year. And we can see things like when the nest timing occurs and what some ratios are. And it gives us an idea of how they may be impacted by various factors, whether it be environmental or seasons. So in 2019, that was when the biologists came to us and decided that they wanted to look at deploying a electronic version. And they came to us because most conservation issues have some spatial aspect to it. It's rare that we ask questions in wildlife conservation or fisheries that doesn't have some location-based information. And so they came to us with a very quick turnaround. They came to us 2 weeks before they wanted to go live and have an electronic version in place that we had never even talked about before. So because of the quick turnaround, we leaned towards Survey 123. And specifically, we wanted to go with the browser version because it would better allow us to just drag and drop and kind of see the flow, because the biologists had certain things they wanted to be shown at certain points and hidden at others. And so with the browser version, we could see that much easier than, like, say, Connect. And then it automatically throw the data in ArcGIS Online, so we didn't have to worry too much about setting up the schema or anything of that. In the first year too, we still wanted to offer the paper survey as a option. We felt like if we just cut it that first year and said electronic only, we would lose a lot of our initial submissions, because people would naturally be kind of hesitant to move into that new format. And so we wanted to keep it there, but our ultimate goal was to migrate as many people as possible to the electronic format. And based on some processes that we had in previous years, we saw that typically after like 2 to 3 years, the majority would use the electronic, like up to 80%. And then to analyze the data, we decided that we would use R. We picked this for a couple reasons. One, we wanted to analyze the data with a programming language of some sort, because once you build it, then it's much easier to analyze the data in the future. But we picked R in particular because typically our biologists have some exposure to R as opposed to other languages. And so there was the potential there that we could develop the script, hand it off to them, and then they could maintain it and run their own analysis. Since R is very popular in an academic setting, it has a lot of ecological packages. So we felt like there could be, advanced analysis built into this more easily. So if you kind of looked at a diagram per se of kind of the structure of it, this is roughly what we had that first year. So survey on 2-3 at the browser, going into ArcGIS Online, had our paper surveys, and we compiled that in R, and then we spit out our analytics. And with like any business process, at the end of the season, we kind of took a look at it and wanted to see what areas we felt like we could improve. But it did work great the first year, but we did want to make some changes. So there was, for example, in the browser version, it just lacked some limited functionality that we could get out of Connect. And so we kind of set a goal that we wanted to migrate it into Connect after that first year. ArcGIS Online was something that concerned me kind of personally because of not having backups. And I knew if we ever somehow lost that data, it would burn the biologists and they wouldn't want to use it again. And we'd lose a lot of traction with trying to deploy GIS into the agency. And we could have put a Python script or something in place to write that out. But at the time, we just didn't have the time to really implement that. Also, we couldn't dynamically transform the data with like referring more to like a view or something in the database. And then more of a hindsight 2020 on our end, we didn't have similar schemas between our paper survey and our ArcGIS Online survey. And so that really added a bunch of extra code to make those match up. And then also just taking a non-spatial product and trying to merge it with a spatial product was challenging. So in our case, on like the paper survey, we didn't necessarily ask for what was the exact lat longs, or it wasn't mandatory, but the county and WMA, they would typically fill out. So taking centroids and getting the geometry that way just took quite a bit of time to clean it up and make that work. And then our work ended up working out good because we made some kind of schema mistakes. Ended up being a little bit more time consuming than anticipated. I initially thought that we could have the R script together in like a week and, have the standardized process put in place. It ended up taking like 2 or 3 months to work all the bugs out. And then where it really was hindrance was if records came in late, since this data was not in an enterprise database and it was just CSVs everywhere, it was a challenge to get all that updated and rerun everything. And it just kind of felt like things were scattered. And we kind of really defeated one of our main goals, or not achieved one of our main goals, which is we were working with CSV still, and we hadn't even got this data into an enterprise database. But, and again, that was kind of on purpose as well, because we knew the schema was going to go through a lot of drastic changes to get where we wanted to ultimately go. And so we didn't want to just throw it into the database and then have to change it at that point, because it'd be a lot more challenging. However, despite that, the first year was still really successful. So the old methods, we'd usually see, I believe, around 700, 750 submissions annually between Turkey and Quail. And so we barely broke 1,000 in that first year, which was great. And we didn't really publicize anything in the first year with the public. So the public made up about 15% of our overall submissions, which we were happy with and felt like that was a great starting point, because we were just really trying to get all the bugs worked out in the first year. We weren't really super concerned with how many people we recruited into the new way. So here's just a rough distribution of the submissions. And in general, you'll see similar trends where most of the observations come within the Ozarks, the Arkansas River Valley, and then around the Ouachitas. And we really wanted to try to work on filling in the gaps of the state. Like the eastern part of the state always tends to have fewer observations, and even some parts of the southern part of the state. And we wanted to just kind of find ways to target those areas and maybe get more of the public to help us fill in those gaps. Because eventually we want to throw this data into some kind of occupancy or abundance model that we can further analyze our product. And we need higher sample sizes if we're ever going to get that. And this is another map. And the goal here of this map is just trying to show that even though the public in 2019 made up a small blur percentage, it was the minority of our overall submissions, it still really helped us kind of fill in those gaps you can see by those pink counties. And that was one of the things we thought, and it was good to see that already happening just on the first year. So in 2020, we decided in the spring, before we went live with the survey again, that we were going to rebrand it as a year-round survey. So this is when we went from calling it our Turkey and Quail Brood Survey to just the annual Turkey and Quail Survey. But we really only emphasized or advertised the survey during June 1st to August 31st, so we don't want to kind of desensitize people to our social media and pushes. But we still want to collect that data if we can. We also took the chance to simplify a lot of our columns. Another one of those hindsight things, we'd have for a number of instead of just having a number of males column in the database and a number of females, we had a number of males turkey and like a number of males quail and so on. And so we want to try to clean everything up as much as we could and lump in anticipation of us moving into our final database at some point. We also added observer effort estimates. And the goal there was that when someone submitted something, we'd ask them like, well, how much time did you spend outside? And we could start to get an idea of, oh, well, this person was outside for 8 hours and they heard 2 quail, or 2 hours and heard 2 quail. We also added where people could submit trail camera photos. And that just kind of gave us a chance to double check some things if they did upload it, and potentially just get some great photos to potentially use for aging chicks. Because as you can probably guess, it's kind of hard to find a 4-week-old turkey on the internet. So that shows all this descriptive characteristics. And then in the fall, so the survey ran in 2020, everything went great. However, we did decide at that point we wanted to start looking at migrating over into Connect. And so we got some feedback on some things that like we had too much descriptions, and especially like on the phone, it was just kind of overkill and you had to like scroll through it, and it was so much that people weren't even reading it. And so we really tried to shorten that up, but we wanted to keep some in there so that we could reduce user error. Just simple things like here's how you tell a gobbler versus a hen, and a male bobwhite versus a female bobwhite. And more importantly, the poult aging. So you can go through and see, you know, a better description of how old they actually are. We also deployed an internal dashboard just as a test to try and get the biologists to start thinking, you know, like what kind of analytics are y'all going to want to get out of this, or kind of just basic summary statistics, so that again, when we did migrate into the enterprise database, we could have that already set up and we wouldn't have to worry about changing it at that point. So if you look at, again, that kind of high level graph, it looks pretty similar. The only thing we really changed is we went into Survey 123 Connect, and then we deployed the internal dashboard, but pretty much everything else stayed the same. And we wanted to go into the next year, try to really put a focus on eliminating the ArcGIS Online R and the paper survey as much as we could, just because that was really taking up a bunch of our time, managing all these CSVs and scripts and whatnot. However, 2020 was another good year. So we saw 1,224 submissions. And most importantly, we saw a huge increase in our public submissions. So we almost got 500, and they went from making up 15% of our submissions to 40%. And we did do more social media pushes in 2020, so that most likely helped contribute to it. In fact, there's a lot of times you can look at kind of the trends of when submissions are put in. And when we do a social media push, you see a big spike. So the more of those we did, the more we're going to see public submissions. But it is a double-edged sword too. If you do too many, people again get kind of like desensitized to it and just scroll past it. We did see actually a decline in professional submissions. They were almost 900 the year previous. And so that concerned us a little bit, but not too much, because the public was increasing so much, and it was the year with COVID. And so we didn't know what impact that had on participation. We didn't know if it helped it or hurt us. So we just kind of, focused more on the back end of it. And if you look at the distribution again, it's similar to the previous year, the River Valley and Ouachita and Ozark, but the eastern part of the state started to really fill out more and get more submissions, which was promising to see. And even the southern part of the state, there was more kind of dark blue counties down there. And when you look at it from the bivariate, you can see there's a lot more pink counties, which we're happy to see, just because, we want to see more public participation if we can, to try to fill in those areas where otherwise we wouldn't have gotten any data. So going into 2021, we felt like we had been talking for a couple of years now, like, hey, we got to migrate this stuff over. We can't keep doing what we're doing. And we felt like it was the kind of the big year, because we saw that the survey was growing. If you kind of plot it out, it felt like it was starting to kind of grow, not necessarily exponentially, but it's growing really quicker than we had anticipated. And all of these CSVs and stuff were just everywhere. And there's concern there that we might lose that data, and we need to get it all cleaned up. So in 2021, we said, all right, we need to centralize this data. Ideally, it would be hosted from our own Agfc database. And then we would have dynamic and live data analysis so that we can better, monitor and be more reactive. But we also kind of threw the idea out, like, it'd be cool if we could show the public too in real time of what they're submitting. So this started kind of the process of making this happen. And this one piece right here is probably what stopped us for the longest time from migrating it into our database, was taking all those CSVs that we had created. So this is simplifying it, and merging that into one master copy. We had changed schemas. We had digital versus paper, plotting all those out, seeing what columns they had, matching it all up, seeing if there's anything we really needed to move over. Like if there's some information we collected, but it really didn't help us and we weren't looking at it. So taking all that, running it through R, building a master CSV, and then throwing that into our database. And in our case, we use Postgres. And then once we got it into our database, the next step was starting to experiment with publishing our Survey 123 where it was hosted off of our database. So we don't have a portal at our agency. And so it wasn't just as simple as setting up to a federated service and it's just all the magic happening. Luckily, you can publish a feature service to on a non-federated service to Survey 123, but you have to take a couple steps. So what we do, like I said, we have Postgres. If you have MySQL or Oracle, I think you can do this as well. But all we had to do was add a global ID to our feature class. Since we did have some attachments, you have to add a global ID to as well. Enable archiving. We also always enable editor tracking. It doesn't actually benefit you in the survey to do that, and I'll talk about why it doesn't. But where it did help in our case is additional web apps that we build off of that service. We can see who is editing the data and whatnot. So once you have that table configured and it's in your ARC catalog, you can publish it to your ARC server, and you have to publish it as a feature access, and you have to secure the service. So in our case, I have it secured to a smaller group just for extra purposes, but it doesn't matter how secure you secure it, just as long as it has it where it has a login to it. And then you enable sync so that it can do offline synchronization. However, the deal killer with this whole process is you cannot use web tier authentication. So luckily, our server, we use Active Directory, and that's just what our IT division has, and that's how we authenticate. And so it works for us. But if you're using LDAP or anything like that, you're most likely using web tier, and this process won't work for you. But once you have created the service, you just go to your organization's ArcGIS Online, you add it as an item to your account, and then you have to actually store the credentials to the service in the item and make it public. So this is why editor tracking doesn't really benefit you much within the survey, because you're storing the credentials right in it. So it's going to stamp that user as the editor or the creator every time. The other downside to this, one, it only works on public surveys, and you are publishing your data to ArcGIS Online where it can be found and edited. So in our case, this doesn't really bother us because we have a 24-hour snapshot of our database. But it is definitely something you want to take in consideration, because it's not a good day whenever you wake up and all your data is gone. So once it is published to ArcGIS Online and added as an item, then all you have to do is go into Survey123 Connect, where you see the Excel file, and you change the submission URL to use your ArcGIS Online item. And it's a pretty simple process. The only thing other than that you got to make sure is that the schema of your Survey123 matches your database table schema. And it's a little bit extra work, but for us, it's really paid off and gave us a lot more capability. So the next step was starting to decide, well, we got to analyze this data. That's the whole point of this survey, so we can get all these indices. And we are using R currently, but I just personally felt like R wasn't a good long-term solution. It wasn't the best to set up on like a task scheduler and run a bunch of code and interact with databases. It can be done, but to me, I didn't feel like it was the best. Ideally, I preferred using views in our database since we have PostGIS. And the great benefit to PostGIS is there's not much maintenance to it. You essentially just type your query, build the view, and then it just runs itself. As your base table changes, it'll reflect with those changes as well. And it can do some really fast spatial processing. The downside to it is when it's a complex query, the end user can have kind of a poor experience. So every time you're zooming or panning on the map, it's rerunning that query. And if it takes 2 or 3 seconds, well, you're going to have a 2 or 3 second lag time. And in this case, for this product, it was doing about 5 spatial joins and a couple transformations. And so the query took about 10 seconds. And so that kind of eliminated that as an option. So the other option, as many of us are familiar with Python. And I was leaning kind of in Python as well. It's got really good, robust libraries. You can do almost anything, and we could post-process the data on the server side and only process batches. But I hate having a million Python scripts sitting on the server in a task scheduler, because as soon as your password changes, you got to go in and update all those task schedulers. That's just not super ideal. And we were getting a pretty good response from this process. and other people are wanting to implement it into their program. And so I was concerned that, well, if every program is going to have a Python script to analyze their data, that just logistically may become kind of a nightmare to manage. And so I kept looking, and I came across one of those Medium blogs and found where an individual was talking about materialized views. And I'd always seen materialized views as an option in PG admin, but I never really looked into it. And it's similar to a view, but the difference is that a view never really stores your data actually in memory. And I could be not saying technicality right, but this is how I understand it, I guess. A view never really stores the data actually in memory. It's just essentially when you call that table, it runs the query and fetches the data for you. A materialized view is different in that when you run the query, it actually writes the data in memory as a snapshot to that table. And so what this allowed us to do is run the query, store the data at that time, and then we could actually do other things like build spatial indexes on the table then and further increase performance if we were running joins off of that view. And the overall maintenance, I mean, we could spit a view out in like 30 minutes to doing some pretty complex stuff. The downside to materialized view is to update it, you have to run a query that says refresh materialized view in its name. So that meant you were either one, putting a trigger in the database, which I didn't know how to do and just didn't feel comfortable messing with, or could build a Python script. It always seems to come back to Python, but build a Python script that would update that view for us on some interval. And so I went with that approach, even though, yeah, I didn't want to deploy a Python script for the application. What it allowed me to do is I only have one Python script that runs all of our agencies' materialized views now. So it didn't bother me too bad. Instead of having potentially 20 Python scripts, we're down to one, and we get the benefit of the fast processing of PostGIS. So it really seemed like a win-win. And out of all of this, PostGIS to me is probably, well, not PostGIS, materialized views is probably one of the greatest discovery I've had personally in like the last year. It's really just made things a lot easier. It's crazy how fast it is. So one thing too, we decided we wanted to do in 2021 was look at deploying an experience builder. It was something fairly new. We had done a couple of them and had pretty good success with them. And we felt like we could use this experience builder to build apps and hopefully increase our transparency with the public involving the survey. And hopefully what this would do in return is we would get increased participation in areas with low observation. So like that eastern part of the state, we'd hope people would go to the dashboard. They would see the dashboard and they go, oh man, they don't have any observations in that county. I saw something, let me submit it. And then also it allowed us to kind of create a landing page. So prior to our experience builder, we had a spot on our website, but everything wasn't quite all in one spot. It was relatively close, but it was kind of embedded. And so by creating the experience builder, we thought maybe we could add some additional apps that would just increase the end user experience. And here's kind of some screenshots. On that first page, we just have a rough introduction. It lets people know, why we do the survey and hopefully get them motivated that they'll participate and let them know we appreciate their help. And then at the bottom there, you can kind of see 5 different buttons, and you just click through those different buttons, and it's got different tabs with different features. So the second page, it has our survey, and on there they can submit straight through the web browser if they want to, or we also have the QR code on the side. And we try our hardest to get as many people as we can to go into the, download the app and get the Survey 123 in the app. Because one, we feel like it works better. They get offline capability, but then also if it's on their phone, they just always have it at their disposal. They don't have to remember a link or how they got to it. And what I'm really hoping is that eventually Survey 123 will get functionality where maybe we can send push notifications. And so when June 1st comes around, we can send all the people at the survey a notification that says, hey, the time frame that we do the survey is open back up. Please submit your observations or something, and then give reminders throughout those 3 months. So that's been great in terms of embedding it and adding the QR code, and we can control like how it looks on iPhones versus iPads and so forth. And then the experience builder. So this is for the public. It shows our current year statistics, and they can go through and look at it by counties or our ecoregions. And then there's a graph. And one thing that's really cool about both of the dashboards in this application is since they're powered off of the materialized view, we have a table in our database that only shows current year observations. So in theory, hopefully it's going to work. But when January 1, 2022 rolls around, everything will reset back to zero and we don't have to do anything at all. And so people can continually just see what's going on in the current year. The only thing that will not reset on this page is the graph, and that is powered by all of the submissions currently for all the years. And so like if someone goes in and says they saw a turkey in the middle of August and the poult was X weeks old, it'll back calculate, well, when that bird would have been hatched, when the nest incubation would have occurred, and when the nest initiation would have occurred. And it's actually set up too where there can be instances where an observer could have seen two hens and they could have two different age class poults, and it'll take that into account and give that the appropriate values. So it's been really cool. We love looking at that graph. So, and for quail, Quail has their own dashboard so they can see their information. And the beauty of taking this approach too is that typically our quail biologist summarizes his data by different ecoregion shapefiles than the turkey. So by having two dashboards, they can both analyze the data however they need and have the public summarizing it by the same boundaries without us having to do a bunch of spatial joins just for those shapefiles. That's the beauty kind of these dashboards. And then finally, on the last page, we have our survey instructions. And this page and the first page, they were just simple story maps, and they work great. So prior to creating this story map, we just had a Word document, and it was just a hyperlink on our webpage. And I mean, it worked, don't get me wrong, but this way seems to be a little more interactive. It can work across multiple devices. And whenever we need to make changes, we can just go in, type the changes we want, hit save, publish it, and the changes are live, as opposed to having to download the Word document, make all of our changes, email to somebody, and they upload it to the website. So it's made it where we can turn around our content a lot quicker. So if you had to follow in kind of the same trend, if you had to kind of graph or diagram out our current structure, doesn't look a whole lot different. I mean, one big change we made this year that's helped us a lot is now whenever we get a paper survey, our biologists just put it straight into the survey on 2-3. So if it's missing data, you just leave it null. But that allows it where we don't have to do anything extra on like trying to merge all these data sets together. It's getting them all in one place. It's in our database now, which makes me feel a lot better. I know it's backed up every 24 hours. Then it also gives us those extra capabilities to analyze that information. Ideally, I would like not to have a Python script updating it, but you know, it's not that big of a deal. It's actually worked pretty smoothly. So, and then we've created all the various web apps, which is increasing kind of our transparency and showing the public that information. I think greatly helped. We don't really have any data to look at too much other than just like a Google Analytics visits, but I think it's pretty cool that people can go and see that information and see that the data they're giving us is providing us valuable information. So 2021, it's not over yet. So that's why I have the asterisk up there. We still actually have 2 weeks, and you can submit the surveys if you want. We can email you some QR codes so you can get it on your phone, but we greatly appreciate it. But in 2019, you know, we did pretty good on that first year, a little over 1,000, but we didn't have a whole lot of public participation. And then we went to 2020 with that pretty good increase and a huge jump in public participation. And then now in 2021 so far, and I don't think it's going to beat 2020, but it may get kind of close. we kind of plateaued a little bit. And so we want to try and focus on that. The biggest problem there, if you look in the black, is that the professional submissions in general have just been almost like steadily going down. And so we want to kind of look into that and see what's happening. Do we still have the same amount of biologists, like 90 biologists, distinct biologists submitting data? It's just they're not sending as many records in, or is it that we're just not getting as many participants? And so we want to see what we can do to kind of try and increase that, because had our professionals stayed the same as last year, we wouldn't be too far off from 2020, which, again, I don't know how COVID impacted it. At least for our agency, people seem to be a little bit more out in the field when it's going on, so they probably had a greater chance of observing some birds, but I can't 100% say that. And then when you look at just the general submissions county, one thing that is kind of interesting about this year is that overall, at least in the River Valley and Ozarks and Ouachitas, the observations seem to be a little bit more distributed, but the eastern part of the state still struggling. So, but overall, we're still happy with it. And then you look at the public participation, and there's still a lot of pink counties, especially in the eastern part. And we've overlaid WMA boundaries with some of these maps, just see how it looks. And yeah, in general, not always, but in general, typically, if we don't have a WMA in the area, you see a higher public participation, which you would kind of expect, but it's not as common as you would think. Some areas where we have a lot of public land, we still have a lot more public participation. So it's pretty neat. So not to be a Debbie Downer or anything, but after every season, we kind of try to look at, what problems did we have? What do we want to improve next year to make this process better? And we had a couple this year. One of them was our data visualization. So we didn't realize this would happen, but our biologists relied heavily when our survey was in ArcGIS Online. They relied heavily on the Survey 123 interface, the data and analysis tab, to look at their data and even update the data. Whenever we hosted that from our database, we lost that functionality. Luckily, it's not too big of a deal. We're just going to spin up some web maps and dashboards, and we can achieve similar results. But that is something that our biologists had to go kind of without this year. Also, we do want to focus on trying to increase participation. We were a little shocked to see this year decline. We just had in our minds that it's going to continue to grow and grow. But, we'll just keep looking at the data and see what we can do to make that happen. And one thing that could have caused it, I personally really don't think it had much of an impact, but we did have some survey submission issues periodically on some weekends where whenever people would try to submit our surveys, it would just throw up an error. And that was actually a problem with our database. So had it been in ArcGIS Online, they would have never got that problem, most likely, because ArcGIS Online seems very stable. Kind of just something we didn't anticipate. And we could have lost a few, but they're pretty intermittent. I mean, it's only like 2 hours, maybe a day or so. And then just some future changes. So we want to get spun up some internal dashboards just for our biologists so they can look at things more in depth and see specific time periods. And like I've said a couple times already, we want to increase public participation. We have a couple ideas. We've talked about putting like QR codes on trucks and business cards and stuff, but the reason we haven't done it yet is if the survey URL changes, then all of a sudden we'd have a bunch of QR codes out there that either went to the wrong survey or didn't work anymore. And so we want to look at maybe like getting a URL on our website that redirects to the survey, and then we can build a QR code just to our website's URL. And then we would just change the redirect if the survey ever changed, and we wouldn't have to worry about that. And we also want to look into potentially mailing out maybe some brochures, get more participation, because we know that social media is only reaching a limited audience. That's just been kind of the the easiest way so far. We can just blast stuff on our Facebook page or Twitter or whatnot. So, however, in conclusion, overall, I would say it's been a great success. We've achieved most of our goals. We've increased our stakeholder participation, kind of took advantage of the crowdsourced data. We feel like we've increased our transparency with the survey, letting people see the data they're submitting and explore the data we use to make some decisions. And we saved our staff a lot of time by reducing redundant processes. Going electronic has saved a ton of time. Before, there was literally administrative staffing that would just have to sit there for hours putting this data in. And then we centralized the data and increased ultimately our data analysis capabilities. And from a GI standpoint, that's probably the biggest win for us, because the more we get to integrate and centralize database is just such a huge win for the agency. So, and with that, I will take any questions if y'all have any.
Excellent job, Cody. Thank you so much for an outstanding presentation. It does look like we have just a couple of questions that have already come in. I'll attempt to pull those up right quick, and we'll start at the beginning. So it looks like the first question will be from Jake. Says, what is your plan when collector gets retired at end of the year? Have you tried this in field maps? If so, what struggles are you running into or expect to run into for the transition?
Yeah, so good question. So at the moment, collector retiring won't impact, at least I don't think so, impact this process. We're using predominantly Survey 123, and that's just because we have a huge public component. They would have to have a named user and all that, and we couldn't do that through collector. So hopefully for this process, it won't impact. And we try to get our staff, the few who can, to use Survey 123 too. So I don't think that'll impact us at all.
Okay, great. Thank you for that, Cody and Jake. Looks like one more question here from Roger. And Cody, this may be something you can type into the chat, but Roger's asking, can you give or provide a URL for your experience builder map?
Yep, I will put it in the chat in just 1 second.
Okay, great. So it looks like if anyone has any questions to add to the conversation, please feel free to use that Q&A option or even the chat option if you would like. And of course, we would like to open things up to all of our panelists as well if we'd like to continue this discussion.
Hey, Cody, I want to congratulate you on an excellent effort. I think you guys should be commended for sharing this information that people are submitting. I think it's incredible. And I'm going to go find this survey and look into the data myself. It's very interesting. And I think it's awesome that you guys are doing that at Game and Fish. So good job all around.
Yeah, no, thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah,
I really like the experience builder. And I'm curious. My one question I have is, I understand the challenges with your biologists and how they want to take a look and dive into the data. So we have maybe 10 or 20 biologists that are interested in that. I was just curious as to the number of your audience.
So as far as analyzing and looking at the data, that's really only 2 biologists that are just the program coordinators. But in terms of submittees, usually have like 100 biologists interacting with it on a yearly basis.
Yeah.
And I guess that if you count the administrative people, there's more interested in it. But the only 2 that want the heavy data analysis are just those 2 program coordinators.
Yeah. That's awesome. I think you did a great job.
Thank you. Yeah, the experience builder really, that's been a real big game changer. You can do all kinds of crazy stuff with experience builder. It's made it super nice to essentially build your own website in like 30 minutes and not have to code at all.
Yeah, it's incredible. I wondered if you guys have dabbled in another ArcGIS product that I have used some. It's called Insights for ArcGIS. Have you guys looked into that?
I think we've dabbled in it very little. Is that similar to like Community Analyst?
No, it's more of a data visualization tool. And
Okay.
it will operate on a database and it will operate on a standalone file. So I've used it very little myself, but I was curious if you guys had maybe looked into it for your biologists.
No, I will put it on the list though, and we will definitely look into it. It sounds enticing, so.
The demos look awesome,
Yeah.
and the training materials are pretty cool. I have to say that. It's really nice.
Yeah, I'm with you. It's got all kinds of cool stuff. Yeah, I'll definitely thank you for that. I'll put that on my list to learn next.
All right. Thanks for that, Brian. And yeah, I was going to say, Cody, I really feel like I've let you guys down. I was in the field conducting a GPS survey, surrounded by quail on both sides. And I feel like I probably should have reported that. It was just like a few weeks ago.
Yeah. Hey, if you remember it and you have a rough location, you can put it in there.
Oh, come on, man. I'm a GIS guy. I know exactly what it was.
Yeah. No, I'm bad too. Whenever I do other agency bird surveys, sometimes I'll forget to go put the data in, and then I have to kind of get onto myself that I'm not even supporting on surveys. So no hard feelings.
Thank you for that. All right. Well, if we have anything from any of our other panelists, now would be the time. If not, we'll go ahead and close things out today.
Cody, I just wanted to say thank you very much for putting us on. It's really interesting and definitely gives a lot to think about for our own agencies that we work with.
Yeah, no, thank y'all for the opportunity. I appreciate it.
All right, absolutely. So just to close things out, just a couple of more announcements. If you have not seen the news or subscribed to our email and gotten notice, an announcement for the 2021 symposium has changed. We are now going virtual. Registration and attendance of the 2021 symposium is now at no cost, and we strongly encourage you to visit events.argisusers.org for more information and get signed up. We're only a few days away. In fact, if you go online now, you'll see the countdown, a little more than 27 days and 18 hours to go. Scroll down just a little bit more, and two opportunities we would really like to encourage you are: one, don't miss your chance to shine. You can click to submit your poster, web app, or story map and be highlighted in the upcoming 2021 symposium. And also share that spotlight. Click there to nominate someone for an award, also to be recognized during the symposium. So please, again, visit events.argisusers.org for more information. So that will conclude things today. Thank you again, Cody, and thank you again to all of our panelists for your participation. On behalf of the Arkansas GIS Users Forum, thank you and have a great day.